If I had known that peace could shatter without a sound, I might have stayed in bed that morning. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet that pretends to be calm but hides something waiting to strike. Sunlight filtered through the glass windows, dancing lazily on the white marble countertop, casting golden flecks onto the floor. I remember the smell of coffee, strong, almost bitter, just how her husband liked it. I was holding my cup gently. My hands shook a little these days, but I still liked the warmth. It reminded me I was alive. Across the table, my grandson Travis was scrolling on his phone, his thumbs moving fast, his eyes never once meeting mine. He looked up briefly, casually, and said it like he was asking me to pass the butter. "Grandma, can I borrow your credit card again? There's something I need for my gaming setup. Just $5,000. $5,000. He said it like he was asking for 5 cents. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look surprised. I just said softly, no. Then silence fell, not the comfortable kind. This one was thick, sharp, the kind that presses on your chest like a held breath. Lisa, my daughter, was standing at the sink. She didn't turn around, not at first. She just stood still, like a storm gathering heat. Then suddenly her hand shot out, not to hit, no, she wouldn't do that. She did something worse. She walked over, calm as could be, and tipped my coffee mug straight into my lap. Scalding, boiling. It soaked through my thin pajamas before I could even react. I gasped. The cup shattered on the floor. Pain bloomed on my skin, but worse than the sting was the way she looked at me, unmoved, unbothered. And then she said, coldly, as if reciting some workplace policy, "If you're going to be selfish, maybe it's time you leave. Either give Travis what he needs, or you can find somewhere else to live. We're not running a charity here, Mom." A charity? That word hit harder than the coffee. I stared at her. The same woman I had carried, nursed, raised. The same woman I once rocked to sleep when she had nightmares. Now she was looking at me like I was a burden. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I simply stood, legs burning beneath the wet fabric, and walked to the sink. I rinsed my hands under the cold water, turned off the tap, and whispered, "I'll be gone before sunset." Elisa blinked. I think she expected a fight, but what she didn't realize, what she never understood, was that silence doesn't mean surrender. Some debts are paid in cash, others in walking away. Later, I sat alone in the guest room, my room. The same one Lisa insisted I stay in after my hip replacement surgery. At first, she had called it a temporary arrangement, a way to help me get back on my feet, but the truth had unfolded slowly. She wasn't helping. She was controlling. Each act of kindness had invisible strings, strings that over time became ropes. Tight ones, then suffocating. I reached up to the closet shelf and pulled down my old suitcase. It had dust on it, hadn't been touched in months. I held it like it was an anchor, something solid in a house that had slowly erased me. Pain shot through my hip as I leaned on the dresser for balance, but I didn't groan. Pain was familiar. What hurt more was that no one knocked, no one checked on me. Travis had seen the whole thing, watched me flinch and freeze, didn't move a muscle. Lisa had screamed loud enough for the neighborhood to hear. Still, not a footstep followed. In the top drawer, under a stack of spare linens, I found a plain envelope. I had hidden it there months ago without knowing why, just instinct. Inside were my birth certificate, my Medicare card, and the routing number to my old bank account. My hands shook as I placed the papers gently on the bed. Something deep inside me had always known this moment would come. As I folded clothes into the suitcase, I did so slowly, silently. Each shirt, each pair of socks, folded like a farewell. I packed my jewelry pouch, nothing fancy. A few costume pieces, and one pearl ring, the last gift my husband had given me before he passed. It was old, but it was mine. Outside, I could hear the television playing. Lisa was watching one of those house makeover shows, the kind where families get everything they want just by asking. She always said I wouldn't understand shows like that. She was right. I checked my purse. It felt light, too light. I unzipped every pocket. No wallet, no ID, no bank card. My chest tightened. I remembered. Yesterday, She had insisted on holding my bag while I limped to the pharmacy. At the time, I thought she was being helpful. Now I knew better. That was when the truth landed like a stone in my stomach. They hadn't just asked for my money. They had already taken it. And still, I didn't scream. I didn't storm out. I simply picked up the phone and called the only person I trusted. His name was Gerald, retired attorney, once my neighbor, still kind. When he answered, I said, "Hi, Gerald, I think I need help." He replied without pause, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. 23 minutes later, I was sitting on the edge of the same bed where I had recovered from surgery. The pain in my legs had dulled. The sting of betrayal had not. I heard the car pull up. Then a knock, not demanding, not intrusive, just present. When I opened the door, Gerald was standing there in his navy windbreaker, holding a canvas tote bag like we were going to the market. He didn't look shocked. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "You ready?" I nodded. He reached for the suitcase without hesitation. "Careful with your hip," he added. That one sentence almost broke me. Not because it hurt, but because I realized it had been so long since someone was kind to me without expecting something in return. As we walked to his car, the house behind me stayed quiet. No doors opened. No one called out. No apologies, no second chances, no resistance. They didn't believe I would actually go, and that, more than anything, was my answer. The drive began in silence. The trees blurred past the window, green streaks of summer waving goodbye. Halfway through town, Gerald finally said, "You know, I saw you last week on the balcony." I turned to look at him. "What? You were holding that little ceramic bird," he continued, eyes still on the road. "I didn't want to intrude, but you looked hollow." I blinked, struggling to recall the moment. A bird? Crying? Maybe I had. Maybe I had been grieving a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. "I figured something was wrong," he continued. "You stopped coming to the library. The bridge club said you hadn't been around either." It hit me then how complete the isolation had been. Lisa hadn't needed to lock the doors. She just made the rest of the world harder to reach. "You're not the first I've helped," Gerald added gently. "Old folks getting managed out of their lives by their own kids. It happens more often than you think." I swallowed the knot rising in my throat. I wasn't just a victim of control. I had surrendered to it. "There's a place I'd like you to see," he said as we approached a wooded street on the edge of town. A modest sign came into view. "Golden Pines, Independent Living for Seniors." I stiffened. "That's for wealthy people, Gerald." Lisa said it was unrealistic. He gave me a dry smile. "Lisa also said you couldn't order your own socks." That made me laugh. Barely, but it was real. We pulled up slowly. The grounds were peaceful, hydrangeas in bloom. A koi pond shimmered under the midday sun. It looked like something out of a life I used to believe belonged to other people. Gerald parked, turned off the engine. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said. "Just take a breath." Inside, the lobby smelled of lemon balm and fresh-baked rolls. Not antiseptic, not sadness. It smelled like life. A woman named Leah greeted us. "Welcome, Ms. Langley. We've been expecting you." I nearly corrected her. "I'm just visiting," I almost said, but something inside me whispered. "Let it be." We toured slowly. There was a small library, a crafts room, even a yoga class in session for seniors. Laughter echoed from down the hall, not controlled laughter, not staged, real. Every hallway had sunlight, every room had windows. No one looked over anyone's shoulder. No one asked for permission to breathe. When we reached the koi pond, I stopped walking. The fish moved gently beneath the surface, unhurried, weightless. It reminded me of a place I used to sit by the river years ago when I still lived alone. "Before all this," I murmured, "I used to have mornings like this." Gerald didn't speak. He just let the silence settle. That was one of his strengths. He never rushed silence. He knew it needed space. Eventually, we returned to a quiet tea room. Leah brought a tray, 2 cups of warm herbal tea, and a plate of lemon cookies. No sales pitch, no pressure, just space. I held the cup with both hands. Let the warmth seep into my fingers. On the table sat a brochure. Month-to-month rent, no contract. A small studio with a kitchenette and balcony. Lisa had told me not to even consider it. Places like that, she once said, are for rich retirees, not people like you. I read the number again. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't impossible either, not if I had what used to be mine. My own bank account. My say in my own life. I don't know if I can afford this, I whispered, more to myself than to Gerald. He sipped his tea, then replied, "Let's find out." And that was the moment, the quiet moment, the one that didn't need raised voices or grand gestures, just a decision. "I think I'm ready to start," I said. Gerald nodded. "I'll help you file the paperwork. We'll talk to a financial protection officer too. If what you said about the missing card is true, we may need to act fast." That word landed with a quiet force. Protection. Not because I was weak, but because I was finally done pretending I didn't need protecting. Even from my own daughter. At Gerald's kitchen table that night, I spread out everything I had left. Insurance cards, old bank statements, a yellowed notepad filled with scribbled dates and strange transactions. "This is messy," I said apologetically. "Truth usually is," he replied. He flipped through the pages, recurring withdrawals, online purchases I didn't make, streaming services I didn't use. PayPal activity at 3:00 a.m. Each mark on the page felt like a bruise I hadn't noticed before. "You weren't just being used," Gerald said quietly. "You were being harvested." I didn't cry, I didn't even shake. I just nodded, because I already knew. And now, so did the law. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, because I was focused. For the first time in years, I had something clear to move toward, something that belonged to me and no one else. At midnight, I was still sorting papers under the soft light of Gerald's dining room lamp. Bank statements, insurance records, even a copy of the old deed to the house. I handled them with care. These weren't just documents. They were memories with evidence. Proof that I had not been delusional. Proof that silence does not mean confusion. It means calculation. The next morning, we met with a financial abuse specialist Gerald knew through his old practice. A woman named Ava, sharp-eyed, gentle voice. She didn't speak much at first, just watched. When I handed her the notebook, she leafed through the pages slowly. Her brows arched with every page. "You weren't just mishandled," she said at last. "You were erased, quietly, intentionally." I nodded. "I'll begin a freeze on all accounts tied to your name," she continued. "We'll flag any unusual activity from the last 6 months and notify the Elder Protection Unit if needed." Then she looked at me and asked, "Do you have any physical proof she had access to your funds?" I reached into the manila envelope I had brought and pulled out a folded check. She looked it over, blinked, and exhaled. "Drawn from a joint account you never authorized. Her handwriting, your name." She set it down carefully. "That's more than proof, that's a pattern." That afternoon, back at Golden Pines, I returned to the quiet of my new room. Sunlight spilled through the windows, warming the wooden floor. On the desk sat a sealed envelope I had never dared to open before. Cliff's letter. The one he had left for me the year before he died. It was labeled, in his slanted handwriting, "Only when you're tired of pretending you're okay." My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. "Ruth, if they ever make you feel smaller than the woman I married. Don't argue, don't explain, just leave. You don't owe anyone the right to dim your light. Use what's yours. And make damn sure they can't take it again." Beneath the letter was a check. $10,000, uncashed, still valid. I laughed, not a joyful laugh, but the aching kind, because somehow he had known. Even back then, he had seen what I couldn't. That same day, I deposited the check, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted the world to know I wasn't done building. The next step was the house. Gerald arranged for a real estate agent, discreet, professional. Her name was Carla. She was courteous, no nonsense. Exactly the kind of woman Lisa would hate. By the time Carla pulled into the driveway for the first walkthrough, I wasn't there. I was 3 towns over, sitting on the balcony at Golden Pines, sipping iced tea, and watching the koi pond ripple in the breeze. Lisa called me 3 times, straight to voicemail. On the 4th, I picked up. "Mom, what the hell is going on? There's a realtor here. You ordered an evaluation of my house." I waited one full breath. then answered calmly. Incorrect. There was silence, then venom. You're not serious. I am, I replied. She scoffed. You don't even live here anymore. What is this, some kind of guilt trip? No, I said plainly. I'm reclaiming what was always mine. She snapped. This is my home. No, I said again, firmer this time. It's the house you've been squatting in. Maintaining with money that wasn't yours. I let you play caretaker. That role is now revoked. She tried again. You can't just throw us out. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. I said one sentence. You told me to leave. The silence that followed was suffocating, and I knew finally that she understood. She tried to guilt me again. You're being cruel. But I had already written the response in my heart. You only miss me now that I said no. And then I hung up. That night, Carla texted me, evaluation completed. Client attempted to interfere but remained professional. Strong resale potential. Will follow up tomorrow. Then Gerald called. She left me a voicemail too, he said. Threats. Let her threaten, I replied. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of her anger. I wasn't even angry myself. I was something far more dangerous. I was certain. Certain that love without respect is just possession. Certain that family built on guilt is not family, it's a prison. And certain that even if all I had was my name on a legal document and a folding chair in the sun, I would be freer than I had ever been in that house. That night I slept with the door locked, not because I was scared, but because I finally had something worth protecting. And this time, it wasn't them, it was me. It happened on a Thursday, just after lunch. The hallways at Golden Pines were quiet, filled with the soft scent of lavender from a diffuser near the reception desk. I had just returned from the garden, a folded quilt over one arm and a book of crosswords under the other. That's when I saw them, Lisa and Travis, walking up the brick path toward the front entrance. Her stride was sharp, too fast, too confident. His was slouched and slow, hands buried in the pockets of a hoodie I had once bought for him on his 12th birthday. Back when he still smiled at me like I mattered. Back before I became a credit line. They were coming for a confrontation. I could see it in their postures, in the way Lisa's jaw clenched, in the way Travis's gaze darted, restless like a child told to apologize but unsure why. What they didn't know was this: I had already said goodbye. They were just now hearing it. Doris, the security guard, spotted them first. She was quick, sharp-eyed, and steady. Without raising her voice, she stepped out from behind the front desk, blocking the entrance with calm authority. I stood in the sunroom, behind the tinted glass. Unseen, but watching, Lisa gestured wildly. Her mouth was moving, fast, full of heat. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew their shape: rage, desperation, entitlement. A language I had once called love. Travis stood behind her, arms folded. He looked at me. Our eyes locked for a second, and I saw it. Not regret, not affection, just panic, because the money was gone. And I was no longer theirs to manage. Lisa tried to push forward. Doris stood firm. No shouting, no escalation, just quiet, solid refusal. Eventually, Travis turned around first, mumbled something, walked away. Lisa stayed. For a heartbeat longer. She looked through the glass wall and finally saw me, not as a mother, not as a victim, but as a mirror. One that no longer reflected her control. She mouthed a single word: Mom. But I didn't wave, didn't rise, didn't blink. I simply sat there beside Marjorie, sipping lemon tea, wrapped in the same quilt Cliff used to drape over my shoulders when I fell asleep during Jeopardy reruns. Lisa turned. The glass doors closed behind her like punctuation, and the silence she left in her wake was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in years. Later that day, Gerald arrived with a paper bag of scones and a bouquet of cut flowers from his garden. He listened as I recounted everything. He didn't flinch, just nodded like a man watching storm clouds pass without ever opening an umbrella. They'll try again, he said. I know, I replied, but I won't. That evening, I wrote one sentence in my journal. When they came with fury, I stayed with peace. That's how you know it's over, when you no longer need to yell back. I tore the page out and framed it beside my bed. A quiet reminder: the storm is not in the sky, It's in how you choose to respond. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Lisa's. Perfect cursive, always slanted just enough to feign elegance. Marjorie spotted me in the lobby, letter in one hand, coffee in the other. "From her?" she asked. I nodded. "Want me to open it for you?" "No," I said. "I don't need anyone else to read this lie." I walked it up to my room. Sat at the same desk where Cliff used to balance the checkbook and write letters to his old Navy friends. Waited until the sun hit the far window. Then opened it, first word, Mom. Not dear. Not I'm sorry. Just Mom. Like she still had that right. The first paragraph was textbook manipulation, shaky apologies. Things got out of hand. "I never meant to make you feel pushed aside. It all happened so fast." Then came the truth, not in confession, but in request. "We're having a hard time now, bills piling up. Travis didn't qualify for the car loan after all." There it was, the ask, dressed in sorrow, perfumed with guilt. The letter ended with, "Maybe we can talk, I really miss you, we all do." I closed the page, stared at the envelope. It felt heavy. I reached inside. There it was, a check, drawn from one of the old joint accounts she'd opened just to help. $3,500. In the memo line, car repairs. I hadn't written it, but my name was printed clearly. She had forged it, or kept it, or both. Either way. It wasn't a letter, it was bait. I folded the check once, then again, and again, until it disappeared into my palm, then walked it straight to the shredder. No anger, no drama, just paper turning into dust. I left the empty envelope on the desk, like a carcass. A reminder that not every message needs a reply. Gerald came by later that afternoon. He saw the half-shredded letter. Raised an eyebrow, she tried again. I handed him the remaining half. He read it silently, then gave it back. "She still thinks you're a mark." "Not anymore," I said. That night I didn't write in my journal. I didn't need to. Because the sentence had already written itself. "I don't care what you meant. What you did was enough." The next morning, Gerald called just after sunrise. I was watching the koi glide through the misty water. "She forged another check," he said. "Same account, same signature, but the trust flagged it this time." I nodded. "She sent me one last week." There was a pause. "Well," he said, "now the bank knows too." Turns out, Lisa had tried one more time to reach into what she thought was still hers, but the trust protections held. And the bank had proof. Voice recordings, IP addresses, signatures, even an email where she posed as me. They didn't need my voice anymore. They had hers. That afternoon, 2 plainclothes investigators arrived at Golden Pines. Not for Lisa. For me, they were gentle, respectful. One took notes. The other asked questions. I handed them everything. Notebooks, printouts, highlighted statements. They didn't look at me like I was fragile. They looked at me like I was credible. And that was more healing than any apology Lisa could ever fake. When they left, one of them said, "You're not the first, Mrs. Langley, but you're one of the few who saw it early enough." I almost corrected him. It wasn't early. But then I stopped. It was early enough. The next morning, Gerald called me again. His voice was calm, but I could hear the steel behind it. "It's time," he said. "You still want to sell the house." I didn't even blink. "Yes." We met at Golden Pines an hour later. He brought a file folder, thick with notarized documents, signatures, and tabs sticking out like teeth. We sat on the sun porch, the koi pond just beyond the railing, golden scales shimmering beneath still water. The air was clear. And so was I. I signed line after line, initialed margins, printed full names in blank spaces. Each mark was a quiet act of revolution. Cliff would have laughed at the way my tongue poked out when I focused. But this wasn't a tax form or a birthday card. This was a severing. The house Lisa claimed, painted, decorated. It had always been mine. She just forgot the part where I never signed it away. She had changed doorknobs, picked out tiles, chosen a couch. But the bones of that house were built on the name she tried to erase. Mine. By the time we finished the paperwork, we had discreetly transferred ownership of the property into the Ruth Langley Irrevocable Living Trust. Not out of fear, but out of certainty. No manipulative daughter, no forged check, no sweet-voiced plea would ever pierce this protection again. And we weren't done yet. With Ava's help, the financial abuse specialist, we initiated a full transaction review of every account I'd once owned. Anything tied to my name was frozen, then audited. 6 months of statements, flagged charges, withdrawals I never authorized. She asked if I had documentation. I handed her my notebook. 12 pages, itemized by date and amount. Receipts and memories stitched together in black ink. She flipped through slowly, eyebrows raised. "You weren't just being used," she said softly. "You were being harvested." I nodded, because now the law knew what I had known all along. I walked back to my room at Golden Pines with a kind of lightness I hadn't felt in years. Not joy, not quite, but something more important, clarity. The air was easier to breathe, because for the first time, I wasn't holding my breath. That night, I opened a small keepsake box I hadn't touched in over a year. Inside was another envelope, one I hadn't opened. One Cliff had left behind before his final surgery. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Open this when you're ready to stop pretending." I held my breath, slid my finger under the seal, and read. "Ruth, if they ever make you feel like less than what you built, less than what you've carried, less than who you are, then don't fight, just leave. You owe no one an explanation for choosing peace. Use what's yours and guard it fiercely." Beneath the letter was a check. $10,000, never cashed. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I laughed, not a bitter laugh, a real one, an aching, throat-cleansing kind of laugh. Cliff had known, even back then. That afternoon, I deposited the check, not because I needed it, but because I was reclaiming every piece of what was mine. Lisa had always assumed she'd get the last word, that her voice, louder, sharper, guilt-laced, would echo longest. But silence, when chosen, is stronger than any scream. A week later, the envelope went out. Legal, official, stamped with the seal of the trust attorney's office. It was addressed to Lisa. The letter was short. Effective immediately, Lisa Andrews is no longer authorized to access any accounts, properties, or financial assets under the legal ownership of Ruth Langley. There was no apology, no bitterness, no explanation, just boundaries. In ink, protected by law, she called me 7 times that day. I didn't pick up. On the 8th, she left a voicemail. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're listening to him instead of your own daughter. Do you even know what you're doing? You're throwing away your family." Family, she said it like it was armor, like it could protect her from the truth. But family isn't immunity. It's a privilege. And she lost it the moment she poured scalding coffee into my lap and called it my fault. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The letter did the talking for me. That night, I shredded the check she had enclosed in the last letter. $3,500, written from a forged joint account. Memo line, car repairs. The ink didn't even smudge as the shredder turned it to paper dust. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. A pale ivory card. The handwriting, hers, I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because I finally understood. Her apologies always came attached to a receipt. Later that evening, Gerald and I sat on the back patio. The sky was navy blue and full of quiet stars. He poured 2 small glasses of red wine. To celebrate, to recalculating, he said, we clinked glasses. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," I said. He smiled. "You didn't just survive her, you ended the cycle." That night, I wrote one last thing in my journal. Kindness is not a contract. Silence is not consent. And love, real love, never asks you to erase yourself. It happened quietly, a call from the front desk. The receptionist's voice was calm. "There's a Lisa here to see you. Would you like us to bring her in?" I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window of the community library, watching a koi break the surface of the pond and then disappear again. Stillness returned just as fast. Then I said, "No, but you can let her know I'm watching." The receptionist didn't ask why. They'd seen this before. Children who only come when their names are on the line instead of the caller ID. I stepped into the sunroom. From there, I could see the lobby through tinted glass. Lisa stood just past the reception desk. hair curled too tightly, face painted with urgency and disbelief. She was pacing, red blouse clashing against the quiet tones of the place. Pointing. Demanding, the same gestures I had once read as love. Now I recognized them for what they were, control clawing to reassert itself. She pointed toward the garden, toward where she assumed I must be sitting, soft and open to conversation. But I wasn't there. I was behind the glass, silent, whole, and this time I wasn't behind glass out of fear. I was behind it by choice. That's the part she never expected, not the resistance, but the indifference. She didn't lose access to me when I hung up the phone. She lost it when I stopped trying to be understood. Security approached, not loud, not aggressive, just a presence that said, "You're not entitled here." I watched her mouth move. No sound, but the meaning was clear. She was unraveling, not because I was gone, but because I stayed gone. Eventually, Travis wandered in behind her. He looked around once, saw me, and quickly dropped his eyes. A second later, he turned and walked out. No words, no fight, just absence. Good, I thought. Let the boy lead for once. Lisa stayed. She turned again toward the tinted glass, scanning until her gaze landed somewhere near me. Her lips moved. Mom. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't soften. I sat still on a cushioned bench, Marjorie beside me, a teacup in hand, fingers wrapped around warmth I no longer owed anyone else. Eventually, Doris gave her the final gesture. Firm and unmistakable, leave. Lisa's arms dropped, her body went still. She turned and walked out. No one followed. The glass doors closed behind her. Soft, final. Back in the garden, Gerald found me. She came all this way, he said, just to be denied at the door. She expected a different version of me, I said. He nodded. The one who thought silence meant peace. That version's gone. We sat on the bench together, the one with ivy curling up its wrought iron legs. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead. The koi drifted lazily below the pond's surface, unbothered by anything above them. I didn't need to explain. Not to Gerald, not anymore. Everyone at Golden Pines already knew, not because I told them, but because they had watched the storm come, and watched me stay seated. Lisa had come for something, control, reversal. A confession she could twist into leverage. She left with nothing, because I had nothing left to give her. No guilt, no permission, not even my attention. And the peace I felt in that moment, it didn't come from winning. It came from footsteps walking away and not needing to be followed. That evening, I received another envelope, dropped in the mailbox at Golden Pines, cream-colored, no return address, but I knew the handwriting by heart. Lisa's, still pretending to be graceful, still slanting letters for effect. I didn't open it right away. I stood there in the lobby, letter in one hand, chamomile tea in the other. Marjorie appeared behind me. "From her?" she asked. I nodded. "Want me to open it for you?" "No," I said, "not this time." I carried the letter upstairs, placed it on the small writing desk where Cliff used to balance checkbooks and fold birthday cards. Waited until the sun hit the window just right, then I opened it. It began as expected. "No, dear. Just Mom." As if the title itself still meant something she hadn't forfeited. The first paragraph was polished remorse. "Things got out of hand. I never meant for you to feel excluded. I just wanted to help." Then came the reveal. "We're behind on bills. Travis didn't get the car loan. We're really struggling." Of course, the ask. It was always just under the surface. A plea wrapped in regret, a hook baited with memory. "Maybe we can talk. We really miss you." The word we tried to wrap itself around my throat, but I didn't let it in. Tucked inside was another check. This one dated months ago, drawn from the joint account she'd once used to pay her own credit card. In the memo, emergency car repairs. She had signed it in my name. I folded it, once, twice, 3 times, then slipped it into the shredder. Watched the teeth take it, watched the lie disappear. Later, Gerald stopped by. She had tried one more forged transaction. But this time, the trust's protective mechanisms activated. The financial abuse specialist contacted the Elder Protection Unit. And this time, Lisa wouldn't just face silence. She would face investigation, I didn't rejoice, didn't celebrate. I sat in the garden that evening, hands in my lap, breath slow. "Do you think she'll be arrested?" Marjorie asked. I looked out toward the koi pond, light playing across the surface like it had nowhere else to be. "I don't know," I said, "and it's not up to me anymore." That's what freedom felt like, not vengeance, distance. Lisa hadn't just lost access to my money, she'd lost access to me. And no call, no apology, no staged breakdown would change that now. Because when you gamble on someone's silence and they finally speak, you realize you were never winning. That night, Gerald and I shared a final toast on the back patio, stars overhead, a gentle wind, laughter echoing from the crafts room down the hall. "To freedom," he said. I raised my glass. "To peace," I replied. Finally earned. That night, I slept with the window open. Not because I was waiting, but because I wasn't. A week passed. Golden Pines was quieter than usual, though maybe it was just that my heart had stopped straining to hear for footsteps that never came. I had stopped listening for phone calls, for apologies, for explanations I no longer needed. Instead, I listened for simpler things. The wind in the willows, the low bubble of the koi pond, the hum of life that didn't ask me to sacrifice myself to be loved. One morning, Gerald arrived with a folder tucked under his arm and a faint grin on his face. Inside the folder was confirmation. The sale of the house had gone through. Clean, legal, final. Lisa had tried to contest it, of course, filed something desperate. But the trust had been airtight. The law had seen what I'd seen for years, only they had the tools to say no in a language she couldn't manipulate. "Do you want to see the transfer summary?" Gerald asked, laying the pages out before me. I looked at the total in the bottom right corner, a number I never expected to see again. A number that meant freedom, not just money. "I don't need to," I said. "I trust you." That afternoon, I walked the full length of the garden path for the first time without my cane. My hip ached, but I kept moving. Every step forward was a declaration. This body, this life, it still belonged to me. I passed the koi pond, where two of the residents were feeding the fish. I smiled and waved. I didn't feel like a guest anymore. Didn't feel like an old woman being managed. I felt placed. Like a puzzle piece finally returned to the right corner. Back in my room, I made a small but important change. I moved the photo of Lisa and me at her college graduation from the top of the dresser to the bottom drawer. I didn't throw it away. I didn't need to, because letting go didn't mean erasing. It just meant I didn't have to stare at that version of her anymore. Or that version of me, the one who thought silence kept peace, even when it only fed pain. I replaced it with a new photo, one Gerald had taken of me last week, sitting in the garden, tea in one hand, book in the other. I wasn't smiling, but I was at rest, and that was enough. 3 days later, I received a letter from the Elder Protection Unit. The investigation into Lisa's financial misconduct had reached its conclusion. Findings were submitted, protections placed, recommendations sent to the district attorney for further action. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I folded the letter in half, slid it into a file-marked legacy, and placed it in the drawer beneath my birth certificate. I didn't need to reread it. The truth had finally been written. On paper, in ink, and outside the pages of my pain. Later that evening, Marjorie joined me in the sunroom with a plate of orange slices and a copy of the community newsletter. "Guess who's been asked to speak at next month's resident circle?" She teased. I blinked. "Who?" "You." I laughed. "About what?" "About reclaiming independence after family trauma." My hands paused over the tea tray, then I nodded. "All right," I said, "but I'm not giving them a lecture. I'll tell them a story." She grinned. "That's exactly what they want." The next morning, I stood in front of the small podium in the dining hall. 10 faces stared back at me, some kind, some curious, some weathered like mine. I began slowly, softly. "I was never afraid of being old," I said. "I was afraid of being forgotten while still alive." Heads nodded, no one interrupted. I used to think peace came from being quiet, from not pushing back, from letting others decide what was best for me. I paused, fingers curling around the edge of the stand. But now I know peace isn't quiet. Peace is being heard and not needing to raise your voice to do it. Afterward, a woman in the back approached me. She didn't say much, just handed me a folded note. Inside was a single line, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." That evening, Gerald brought dinner to my unit. 2 trays of roasted vegetables and rice, a bottle of wine, a small vase with one lily. We ate quietly as we often did, not out of habit, but out of comfort. "Do you ever think she'll come back?" Gerald asked, almost a whisper. I shook my head. "She never left, Gerald. She was gone long before I walked out." He nodded slowly. "But if she did," he asked. "If she knocked, cried, said the right words." "I'd listen," I said, "but I wouldn't hand her the keys." The next day, I walked to the koi pond alone. No cane, no folder, no thoughts of bills or lawyers or bank statements, just a slice of apple in my palm for the fish, and a notebook in my bag. I sat on the bench and opened it. A fresh page, blank, and at the top I wrote, "A life rewritten doesn't begin with revenge. It begins when you stop asking for permission to be free." Behind me, laughter from the crafts room spilled out through the open windows. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the sound of someone humming a tune I didn't recognize. I closed my eyes, breathed in, no longer erased, no longer reduced, not a shadow, not a transaction, just a woman with a name that still belonged to her, and the quiet, powerful decision to never let it be taken again. That night, I went to bed early, not out of exhaustion, but because I had nothing left to run from. The door was locked. The room was warm, and in my dreams, I wasn't hiding from the past. I was walking toward a future that had waited, patiently, steadily, lovingly, for me to catch up. A month passed. Golden Pines moved at its usual pace. Slow, warm, kind. No one rushed here. There were no door slams, no raised voices, no accusations dressed up as care. Just the hum of conversation, the quiet click of knitting needles, and the creak of rocking chairs beneath fading sun. My days were no longer about surviving. They were about choosing where to sit, choosing what to read, choosing who I was in each moment without the weight of anyone else's expectations. I had received no more letters, no calls, no voicemails from Lisa. For a while, I wondered if the silence was just a pause, the calm before another attempt to breach what she'd once claimed as hers, but it never came. And slowly, that silence became peace. Because peace isn't just the absence of noise. It's the absence of permission. Gerald stopped by one afternoon with a new plant, a gift. He placed it gently on my windowsill. "Lavender," he said, "for sleep and strength." I looked at him. "You've already given me both." He smiled but didn't argue. "Still," he said, "it's nice to watch something grow." A week later, I found myself standing in front of the community bulletin board. Someone had pinned a handwritten note. "Looking for volunteers to mentor teen residents from local group home. Just an hour a week. They need steady voices." I stood there longer than I expected. Steady voices. I knew what it meant to grow up with shaky ones, to lean on people whose kindness came with receipts. I pulled one of the tabs at the bottom of the page, folded it, and tucked it into my pocket, not because I needed something new to do, but because I remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and I was no longer willing to be part of anyone's silence. I met her a week later. Her name was Ray, 17. Shoulders always tight, like she expected the ground to fall out beneath her at any moment. She didn't talk much during our first meeting. Just picked at a piece of paper she'd folded into 100 sharp corners. But she came back the next week, and the one after that. We didn't talk about trust. We just built it one quiet session at a time. She asked me once, "Why do you come?" I said, "Because someone has to show you what love without demands looks like." She nodded, didn't smile, but her eyes softened. That was enough. My life wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need to be, it was layered. Full of small, intentional choices that slowly became a legacy no one could steal. A legacy of calm, of resistance without cruelty, of dignity restored not by revenge, but by refusal to be used, refusal to explain myself to those who never asked who I truly was, refusal to confuse guilt with connection. One evening, I sat in the library, flipping through an old photo album Gerald had helped me reconstruct. Most of the pictures were from before Lisa was born. Me in nursing school, Cliff in uniform, grinning at something just outside the frame. The apartment we had started our marriage in, too small, always too warm, but full of laughter. Then later pages, Lisa as a child wearing a paper crown. Travis as a toddler crawling across my lap, memories that once made me ache. Now they made me pause, not in pain, in recognition, because those moments were real. They just weren't forever. And that was okay. Time didn't erase what happened, but it softened the edges, not to make the truth blurry, but to make it bearable. I no longer needed to be bitter to prove I'd been hurt. I didn't need to be loud to prove I was free. That summer, I planted rosemary in a ceramic pot by my window. It reminded me of Cliff, of Sunday chicken dinners, of small comforts that didn't require explanation. Sometimes Marjorie joined me in the evenings. Sometimes Gerald did. Sometimes I sat alone, the breeze brushing my cheek like a hand I still remembered. And sometimes Ray sat with me, arms crossed, pretending not to care. But she always stayed till sunset. "Do you miss them?" she asked once. I knew what she meant. I sipped my tea, took a breath. "I miss who I thought they were," I said, "but not who they became." She nodded slowly, didn't press. That was how we spoke. In truths, not details. Later that week, she handed me a folded note, handwriting jagged, unsure. "You're the first adult who never tried to fix me, just saw me. Thank you." I didn't cry. I just held the paper for a long time, then placed it in the drawer beside Cliff's letter. Different ink, same grace. On the last Sunday of the season, I stood at the pond alone. The koi moved lazily under the water, no urgency in their rhythm. And I thought to myself, I'm not who I was, and I'm not bitter about who I used to be. I'm simply someone who survived the hardest goodbye. Not to a person, but to a version of myself who always said yes out of fear. And now, I say yes only when I choose to.